More than half of the people on earth recognize the Bible as the foundation of their religious beliefs. It tells how the first humans, Adam and Eve, enjoyed a personal relationship with the true God, their creator, until they broke that relationship by their disobedient behavior. That Genesis account also tells how later descendants, Enoch and Noah, personally walked with God. Thousands of years later, the Apostle Paul told a group of men assembled in Athens, Greece, that God intended that people everywhere would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far off from each one of us. But most in Paul's audience were wrapped up in their own religious traditions, worshiping idols made of wood, stone, or metal. Where did the various different religions come from? That's an important question because it helps reveal whether a religion is true or false. People who aren't content simply to accept the religion of their parents may find themselves bewildered by the sheer number of religions in the world. Since they all contradict each other and claim to be the only ones with the truth, how can we weigh their claims one against the other? Discovering where each religion came from goes a long way toward establishing truth versus falsehood. So let's look at where the religions came from. With the new religions and religious cults that have sprung up recently, it's easy. They can easily be traced back to their roots. The story is sometimes laid out in the news media after the sect makes headlines, like in 1978, when over 900 followers of Jim Jones, pictured here, died in a mass suicide murder that made headlines worldwide. That sect, called the People's Temple, had been founded in Indianapolis, Indiana, in 1955 by Reverend Jim Jones, a Pentecostal pastor who later began teaching what he called apostolic socialism and engaging in sex with both male and female members of his church. Jones went on to present himself as the God and Savior of his followers. At his command, his followers shot and murdered a United States congressman who was about to expose their bizarre behavior, along with members of the news media who were also killed. And then they committed mass suicide by drinking a poisoned beverage under the watchful eyes of armed guards who killed any who refused to drink. Another modern example is the Branch Davidian sect, led by David Koresh, shown here in Waco, Texas. Koresh met his end along with 78 of his followers who died in a fire at the sect's residential compound at the end of a 51-day headline-making siege by the FBI and other federal authorities. Koresh had claimed to be a prophet speaking for God, and he used that position to exercise total control over his followers, including the right to promiscuous sex with any he chose. Koresh seized that powerful position through a relationship with the widow of the founder of the Branch Davidian sect. That sect originated in 1965 as a split from the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists, a small sect that was formed in 1935 by a man expelled from the Seventh-day Adventists. But Jim Jones' People Temple and David Koresh's Branch Davidians drew only a few hundred or a few thousand people. But what about the larger religious groups, like the Seventh-day Adventists themselves with 24 million members, and the Jehovah's Witnesses with 10 million? Both of those religious groups can be traced back to origins here in America in the mid to late 1800s. In the early 1800s, a man named William Miller began to teach falsely that Christ would return in the spring of the year 1843. Miller attracted followers from many different churches. When nothing happened on the expected date, he recalculated to a date in the spring of 1844, a year later, and then again to a date in the autumn of 1844. When nothing happened on any of those dates, most of William Miller's followers went back to their own churches. But some of his die-hard followers began forming various Adventist denominations. Ellen White's Seventh-day Adventists held on to the 1844 date and claimed that some of Christ's prophetic parables were fulfilled in 1844, as Christ supposedly began an investigative judgment among believers. Another Adventist group claimed that they found a 30-year error in William Miller's calculations, and they began teaching that Christ would return in 1874. When nothing happened on the expected date, they insisted they could not be wrong, and so Jesus must have returned then, only invisibly. A young member of that group named Charles Taze Russell broke away and started his own Watchtower magazine. That Watchtower magazine also taught that Christ returned invisibly in 1874. After Russell died, the sect's lawyer, J.F. Rutherford, used legal tricks to take control of the organization. He changed and even reversed many of Russell's teachings and gave the group a new name, Jehovah's Witnesses. They still teach that Jesus returned invisibly, only now they say 1914. Statistics are hidden in patient confidentiality records, but that Watchtower organization has been responsible for more unnecessary deaths than Jim Jones and David Koresh together, due to prohibiting members from having blood transfusions and other medical procedures over the years. So that's where the Jehovah's Witnesses and the various Adventist churches came from. But what about the larger and more mainstream Christian groups? The Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox churches, and the various Protestant churches. Christ's apostles took his gospel message to nations throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. The Romans at first ignored the spread of Christianity, but as converts grew in numbers, the empire persecuted the church and killed Christians. That intense persecution continued until the time of Emperor Constantine in the 300s AD. Constantine claimed to become a Christian himself, and soon Christianity became the accepted religion of the whole Roman Empire. The persecution ended, but Satan the devil attacked the churches in a different way. A power structure began to develop in the churches, with corrupt men seeking the power and glory of being prominent leaders. That was already starting to happen while the Apostle John, the last of the apostles, was still alive. John wrote about it to the church he addressed in his last letter, when he told them, "I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds, which he does, prating against us with malicious words. And not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren, and forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church." That man, Diotrephes, had begun acting like a dictator in that church, and similar things happened in other churches after the apostles died. Church leaders also drew close to political leaders and became powerful men in the community. They began lifting themselves up above other believers, even by dressing differently to show their preeminence and power. Reminiscent of the Judaizers Paul fought against in the early churches, these clergymen improperly imported into the churches the trappings of Jewish temple worship. They wore fancy costumes, carried incense burners like the Jewish priests at the Jerusalem temple, and they even turned communion and the Lord's Supper into a sort of magic transformation that only those clergy supposedly had the power to perform. But Jesus never intended Christianity to have a clergy-laity distinction, where clergymen acted like go-betweens between ordinary people and God. Jeremiah says that everyone in the New Covenant would know God. They will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. Everyone can approach God directly, so there is no need for a religious hierarchy to connect men with God. But sinful men abused their power as clergymen and elevated themselves over the people. At the same time, the bishops or pastors of large churches in major cities exercised a lot of influence in the churches in the areas around their cities. And the Bishop of Rome became powerful because Rome was the center of the secular government. After the Western Roman Empire fell, the Bishop of Rome, now called himself Pope, still served as a link between the churches and the various countries that the Western Roman Empire split up into. The Eastern Roman Empire continued to rule over areas from Greece eastward, and the bishops of eastern cities like Athens, Cairo, and Moscow ruled as powerful men in the Eastern churches. They never looked to the Pope in Rome as an authority. Those Eastern churches became what we today call the Eastern Orthodox churches, while the Western churches under the Pope of Rome became the Roman Catholic churches. So that's where those religions came from, the Roman Catholic Church in Western Europe, and the Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, and so on in Eastern Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. What about Islam? A quarter of the world's population adheres to the Muslim religion today. It came into existence shortly after the year 600 AD, when an Arab named Muhammad claimed to have received revelations from God. The Arabian Peninsula was already populated by a mixture of Christians, Jews, and pagan idolaters, and Muhammad combined elements of all three into his own new religion. The Muslim holy book, the Quran, talks about Jesus as a messenger from God and calls him the Son of Mary, but not the Son of God. The Quran acknowledges the Jews as God's instruments for recording and preserving the Bible. And Islam's holiest mosque in Mecca contains within it the Kaaba and its sacred black stone that was worshipped as an idol by pre-Islamic pagan Arabs. With this mixture of Christian, Jewish, and pagan religious traditions, Muhammad began gathering followers. They took control of the Arabian city of Medina, and when an army of 10,000 could be assembled, they conquered the city of Mecca. Muhammad's successors soon took over the rest of the Arabian Peninsula. Islam spread not by appealing to hearts and minds, but by violent military conquest. Official Muslim belief divides the world into two parts: the House of Islam, where Sharia law rules, and the House of War, lands that remain to be conquered by jihad. Christianity was the prevailing religion in the Middle East, but then the armies of Islam conquered the world of the Bible lands and violently forced Christians to deny Christ. Islamic armies went on to conquer North Africa and pushed into Eastern Europe, Spain, Portugal, and France. Christian Europe finally stopped the Muslim invasion, in the east at Vienna, Austria, and in the west at Tours in France. But Islamic armies continued to take over territory on other continents, with that conquest continuing even now today in Central Africa. The Billy Graham organization's Decision magazine, in this article pictured here, reports in June 2025 how Muslim fighters massacred 200 unarmed Christians in Nigeria. The jihad currently taking place throughout Africa follows the same pattern of Islamic conquest down through the centuries. The liberal news media today try to associate the term Islamic terrorist with small fringe groups. But that sort of terrorism is actually an official teaching of Islam, found in the Quran at chapter 8, verse 12, which says, "I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore, strike off their heads." That's from Quran 8, verse 12. So beheading for confessing Jesus is still the case in much of the Islamic world today. The beheading of these Coptic Egyptian Christians made news headlines, but few Americans realize that this is standard treatment for Christians according to Islamic law. Islam forbids its subjects from becoming followers of Jesus, from turning to him as their Lord and Savior. Those who do embrace Christ face intense persecution, prison, and even death. Their stories seldom become headlines, but converts to Christianity are right now sitting on death row in strict Muslim countries, convicted in court for crimes like apostasy, leaving Islam, or insulting the Prophet Muhammad. And there are many others who are not put on trial but are murdered by relatives or neighborhood mobs for the same reasons, with Muslim police and authorities turning a blind eye. "If you become a Christian, we will kill you." That is what official Islamic teaching is for more than 1 billion of its followers worldwide. It's the official position of Islamic religious authorities that Muslim converts to Christianity must be killed according to Islamic law. That threat does not have to be carried out very often to accomplish its intended result: to intimidate Muslims, terrorize them, and prevent them from choosing to follow Jesus. It should not be surprising, then, that for hundreds of years before Left Behind theology swept through the churches, it was commonly taught among Christians that the rise of Islam was foretold in the Bible. Martin Luther, John Calvin, Jonathan Edwards, and Sir Isaac Newton were among the many Bible scholars who saw Islam prophesied in Revelation and in Daniel chapters 7 and 8. But what about the Protestant churches and the other major religions like Hinduism and Buddhism? The original manuscripts of the New Testament were written mainly in Greek, which many educated Romans could read. But translations into Latin appeared very quickly and spread widely because Latin was the common language of the Roman Empire. Romans were highly literate because reading Latin was necessary in order to do business successfully. Even slaves in the empire commonly learned to read. But after the Roman Empire collapsed, the literacy rate dropped among the general population. And people who could read could usually read only in their local language, Portuguese, German, French, English, etc., not in Latin or Greek, the languages the Bible continued to circulate in. In Western Europe, only the clergy could usually read Latin. and so only the clergy could read the Bible. For some clergymen who were not godly men, that meant job security, so they kept the Bible in just Greek and Latin as a way to hang on to their power. The Apostle Paul predicted this when he said in Acts 20:29 that savage wolves would abuse Christian churches, wolves in sheep's clothing. The Roman Catholic Church prohibited translating the Bible into the languages ordinary people could read, and they used their alliance with political leaders to make it illegal for people to read the Bible. Translating it into languages people could read became a crime punishable by death. But banning could not stop the spread of Bible reading. English translator John Wycliffe was tried as a heretic. After that, in what is now the Czech Republic, John Huss was burned at the stake. 100 years later, in 1517, a German priest named Martin Luther translated the Bible into the common people's language and challenged the corrupt church hierarchy. The church and secular authorities declared Luther an outlaw and tried to kill him, but several German princes protected him, and Luther lived to lead a reformed church. The courage of Luther and others like him led to what's called the Protestant Reformation, where churches across Western Europe broke from the control of the Pope of Rome. The Protestant churches today all trace their roots to that Protestant Reformation in the early 1500s. But what about the foundation of Christianity itself, as well as Hinduism, Buddhism, and Judaism? To answer that, let's start with the very beginning of religious worship. Adam and Eve's offspring knew who God was, but only a few of them walked with God. One of those was Noah, who God instructed to build an ark to preserve the human race when God wiped a corrupted society off the face of the earth. Noah's offspring knew who it was who sent the worldwide flood, but when they refused to obey God's command to spread out and fill the earth, and chose instead to build a city with the skyscraping Tower of Babel, God stepped in and confused their languages, so they could no longer cooperate on that project, and they were forced to scatter over the surface of the earth. They had no relationship with God, so as generations passed, they passed on to their descendants confused stories of angels and demons. Satan the devil took advantage of their instinctive desire to worship. Satan led people everywhere to invent gods and goddesses. Eventually, the nations in the four corners of the earth were all worshiping gods, so-called, of wood, stone, and metal, idols shaped like men or like animals that they worshipped as gods. That sort of idol worship has survived in modern times as Hinduism, a religion with many gods and many goddesses and countless idols. So that is where the Hindu religion came from. The Buddhist religion began as a branch of Hinduism. A wealthy Hindu prince named Siddhartha Gautama claimed to achieve the spiritual goals of Hinduism, and he laid out the path to that goal for his followers. The followers began to call Siddhartha the Buddha, meaning the enlightened one, and Buddhism broke from Hinduism as a distinct religion of its own. Followers of Siddhartha made statues of him, and the worship of those Buddha idols characterizes popular Buddhism today. So that is where the Buddhist religion came from. But around 2000 BC, the true God broke the worldwide pattern of idol worship by speaking to a man named Abraham in a town near modern Baghdad, Iraq. God called this Iraqi Abraham into a relationship with him. Later, God revealed himself to Abraham's son, Isaac, and to Isaac's son, Jacob. But the more widespread revelation of God came when God called Moses to lead Jacob's offspring out of slavery and to establish them as the nation of Israel. Almighty God inspired the books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, to teach the Israelites how to live and how to worship. Those inspired books are called the Torah and form the foundation of Judaism, the Jewish religion named after Judah, Israel's leadership tribe. But modern Judaism often attaches more weight to the writings of their rabbis over the centuries than to the original inspired writings. So that's where the religion of Judaism came from. God gave those laws of Moses only to the Jews. He never intended for other nations to convert to Judaism. In fact, God put up a huge barrier in place to make sure that large numbers of Gentiles would never convert to Judaism. He required that male converts get circumcised. Circumcision is a very painful procedure that leaves an adult man in extreme pain for days. That guaranteed that Judaism would never spread beyond the Jews themselves. But God had a different plan to make himself known to the rest of mankind. He sent his only begotten Son from heaven to be Israel's promised Messiah, or Christ. He sent Jesus to be born miraculously to descendants of Jerusalem's ancient King David. Isaiah 11:10 says of the Messiah, "In that day the heir to David's throne will be a banner of salvation to all the world. The nations will rally to him." So the Jewish Messiah would rally to himself people of all nations, not just Jews. He would be a banner for the peoples, and the non-Jewish nations would seek him and rally to him. So many Gentiles joined Jesus' original Jewish followers that they greatly outnumbered the original Jewish followers of Jesus. The Bible book of Acts says that it was in the Turkish city of Antioch that the name Christians was first used to describe this gathering of Jewish and Gentile followers of Jesus. It was in Antioch that the disciples were first called Christians. So that is where Christianity came from. The spread of Christianity among Gentile nations fulfilled Jeremiah's prophetic words when he said to God, "The nations will come to you from the ends of the earth, and they will say, 'Our fathers inherited nothing but lies, worthless idols of no benefit at all. Can man make gods for himself? Such are not gods.'" Early Christian missionaries went out into the world and challenged the people everywhere to re-examine the false gods that they worshipped. The Apostle Paul did that some 2,000 years ago when he visited one pagan city after another. Athens, Greece, was a city filled with idols, statues of the false gods and goddesses the Greeks worshipped. Paul told the men of Athens, "The God who made the world and all things in it, he being Lord of heaven and earth, doesn't dwell in temples made with hands, neither is he served by men's hands, as though he needed anything, seeing he himself gives to all life and breath and all things." As we noted earlier, moments ago, Paul told them that God intended that people everywhere would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. Jeremiah says that everyone in the new covenant would know God. They will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. Jesus fulfilled Jeremiah's prophecy by instituting that new covenant at his Last Supper with his disciples, and he invited everyone to come back into a close personal relationship with God that does not depend on religious institutions. He said, "Those who accept my commandments and obey them are the ones who love me. And because they love me, my Father will love them. And I will love them and reveal myself to each of them. All who love me will do what I say. My Father will love them, and we will come and make our home with each of them." So we are called to come back into a close personal relationship with God, like Adam enjoyed before he sinned, and like others in the Bible who walked with God. We are called not to join a religion, but to come into a relationship with God that brings untold blessings now and blessings for eternity to come.
Pastor David Reed has authored numerous books, served as a contributing editor of Dr. Walter Martin's Christian Research Journal, taught at Spurgeon's in London, and pastored Emmanuel Baptist Church in New Bedford, Massachusetts. He now provides these worship services for individuals at home and free to use by small groups and churches.
This Bible Nook ministry hosts a weekly remote Bible study and prayer meeting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesdays, except for a brief recess July and August and certain holidays. You're welcome to join the free informal study via the phone or Zoom information displayed on the screen and on Facebook. Bible Nook also provides free online Bible resources that are also available in print, and resources explaining Bible prophecy, as well as resources to help you respond to the cults. Our videos of worship services and messages remain available for streaming on Facebook and YouTube. We provide traditional worship services for believers who otherwise would not have them because they're confined to the home or they don't have a nearby church that sings traditional hymns and preaches Bible messages. And our messages proclaiming and upholding the gospel of Christ reach millions of people, one message alone scoring 250,000 views. To maintain our freedom of speech, we have not applied to the government for their approval as a 501c3 ministry, but all the gifts we receive go to the expense of spreading Bible messages. If you are being blessed by this ministry, or if the Lord moves your heart to spend some of your resources on our gospel outreach, you can do so via the donate button at BibleNook.com or by sending a check to the address shown on the screen.